all the wonderful work they do in spreading Torah all over the globe, all over the world. So many people are the beneficiaries of the lectures on TorahAnyTime, and we should all take advantage of over 2,000 lectures that you can watch on TorahAnyTime. Just want to make an announcement at 10 o'clock on Saturday night, after Shabbos, special movie on Birchat HaChama, on the blessing of the sun, which is going to be Wednesday. We know that Wednesday, the opportunity once in every 28 years to make a special blessing over the sun. The sun and the earth are going to be aligned as they were when the sun was created. This happens every 28 years. And you'll understand from the video why every 28 years. It's a fascinating moment. We're getting back to a point, video. And Rabbi Pesach and Rabbi Foyer are going to explain it from Kabbalah, from science, the whole thing. 10 o'clock Saturday night here. Okay, I encourage it very much. And we're going to make a blessing as a community, actually, Wednesday. You'll probably get more. Yeah. Mostly Shabbat after Shabbat. Okay, so the program tonight is I'm going to give a little talk now on some of the ideas of Pesach, and Rabbi Nisanov is going to speak after me and going to go into more of the details of the halachot, of the laws of how to set up your kitchen. So right now we'll do something a little more philosophical, and then Rabbi Nisanov will take care of something a little more practical. So let me just begin by telling you a quick story that one time I had a student, and this student was really on his way to becoming more observant. And he was a great guy, and he was coming to my classes all the time, but his wife was very much against it. And it was kind of an unusual situation, because usually the women tend to want their husbands more than, let's say, the husbands want their wives. It's a rare scenario that you see a woman who's saying, listen, Friday night, I don't want to stay home and have a Shabbat meal. I'd rather go out to the, out to the mall, or out to eat. She's a very wonderful lady, but it was just, whatever reason, she had her issues, and he couldn't really get her to follow. And so I was very excited, after a long time of learning with him, that she agreed to come to a seminar that we were doing in New Jersey. And we were doing a seminar, and I was very excited that she would come, and I have an opportunity over 3 days, Friday through Sunday, to speak with her, talk with her, and try hopefully to explain to her what her husband already knows about the beauty of who we are as Jews and what we have. So we get to the hotel, and we sit down, and she joins my family at the table Friday night, and we begin to talk, and it's just a nice conversation, but nothing great. But as we're getting towards the end of the meal, she says to me, Rabbi, I have so many questions I want to ask you. When can we talk? So, being a young, inexperienced rabbi, I said, whenever you want. I'm ready, whenever you'd like. How about after dessert? How about right after dessert? So, we have dessert, and everybody leaves, and she and I stay at the table, and they bring out tea. We're sitting there, we're drinking tea, have a little bit of cake in front of us, and we get to talk. And she says to me, Rabbi, how do we know God exists? How do we know Hashem is there? So listen, this is what I do for a living, to answer these questions. So I start telling her, I give her my whole speech. I'm talking about perfection in creation, and I'm talking to her about the perfection of the human body. She says, Rabbi, that's wonderful, that's great, but how do we know that God actually communicated with us? Oh, lecture number 2, right? You've heard my lectures before. Lecture that God spoke to the entire Jewish nation at Har Sinai. And we have 5 million witnesses. And no other nation's ever made such a claim. And I'm just telling her and I'm answering her, best lectures I've ever given. And then she said, but Rabbi, that's wonderful, it's so beautiful, but how do we know it's relevant to our lives? Oh, relevancy to our lives. Here comes the Shabbat lecture. No one is happier, family life is better, you have more peace of mind. I'm talking about Shabbat. But Rabbi, but does it really apply today? Now it's Tarot Mishpacha, right? I'm going through the whole thing. And for me, this is what I do for a living. And someone asks me these questions, and they're so eager to hear, this was so wonderful. Just on a side point, I was explaining something to my brother the other day, He was like, he didn't agree exactly with what I was saying. So I said to him, look, just give me a chance. This is what I do for a living. He says, that's what you do for a living? I said, I was kind of surprised. Make a living in this, teaching Torah. But, so I was having a great conversation with her, and we were talking, about 2-3 hours, maybe about 3 hours. And she was so excited, and her face was lit up, and she was so receptive to the words I was saying. And I thought this was great. And I came back to my wife, and she said, it was like 1 a.m. She said, how'd it go? I said, great. I think I really touched her. Next morning on Shabbat, I go down to breakfast. She's not there. I look during the tefillah. I don't see her. I look for her at lunch. She's not there. I say to her husband, where'd she go? So she's up in her hotel room. So I said, so I looked for her later, the lecture in the afternoon. She's not there. She's not there for the third meal. She's not there for Havdalah. I said to her husband, what's going on? Is she okay? Is she sick? She doesn't want to come out of her room. So I look for her Sunday morning at the brunch, at the big breakfast we have. I look for her at the lecture. I don't see her the rest of the 3 days. She stayed in her room for 3 days. So I said to her husband, what's going on? We had such a great talk Friday night. And what happened? I was so excited. She was going to participate and really be part of this. And so her husband said to me, well, she asked you her questions. She disagreed with the answers. So she feels there's nothing else to discuss. So she stayed in her hotel room the rest of the 3 days watching television. So I came back to Queens really depressed, thinking, I had such an opportunity, and what went wrong? So I have a good friend, and he's about 75 years old. He's probably the most incisive person in human nature I've ever met. I said to him, his name is Marty. I said, Marty, let me tell you what happened. I tell him what happened. I said, what did I do wrong? This lady was asking me these questions, and she was so sincere, and I gave her my best answers, and I lost her. And he said to me, Rabbi Kraft, you blew it. He said, you really blew it this time. I said, I know, but tell me what I do wrong. He said, she wasn't asking you questions. She was making statements. You heard it as a question. But she didn't want to know. She was just telling you her opinion. She phrased it in a way that it sounded like a question, but she had no desire to hear an answer. So all you did by answering her so-called questions was you gave her the excuse to think that there are no answers. Because she wasn't asking to learn. She wasn't asking to know. She was just making a statement. This is what I think. Rabbi, how do you know there's a God? She wasn't asking me, Rabbi, how do you know there's a God? She was saying, Rabbi, how do you know there's a God? That's not a question. That's a statement. Of course, she phrased it in a very nice way, so she fooled me. So all I did by answering her questions was I convinced her that there are no answers. Now, I noticed something. Actually, the Malbim notices this. When you look at the Seder, what we're going to do on Wednesday night is we're going to spend an evening asking questions. And the whole point of the Seder is to ask. And that's why so much of what we do at the Seder is to evoke questions. Now, what I do at my Seder, one day you'll come up to my Seder, I'd love it. I sit there with a big bowl of candy in front of me, and whenever one of my children asks a question, I throw them some candy. And the reason why is because I want them to ask. I want to encourage questions, because questioning is the whole purpose of the evening. Because what's a question? A question means that you're searching for something that you don't know. A question means that you're incomplete and you want to be filled up. Now, it's interesting, by the way, what is almost the first thing that we do at the Seder? We sit there at the Seder, we say Kadesh, we make Kiddush, right? And then we do Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas, we dip, we'll talk about that. Then we do something called Yachatz. We break the middle piece of matzah in half. We put the smaller piece underneath the napkin, we hide the big piece. What's the idea of breaking something in half? What's the symbolism? The symbolism is that I feel that I'm not whole, that I am incomplete, I am broken in half, and I want to spend tonight looking to find an answer, looking to understand more deeper what it means that God took us out of Egypt, and what it means that God has been actively involved in the life of the nation of the Jewish people. We break the matzah in half to symbolize that we want to find something. And the whole Seder, if you think about it, is looking for that matzah. And that's the last thing that we do. You have to search it for it. You You have to find it, and you can't complete the Seder till you get it back, to make it whole again. But the night is a night of searching. And that's why we begin with questions. Now, our rabbis tell us, for example, you're supposed to come to the Seder. I wear a white kittel. That's the thing I got married in. It's like a long white robe. I don't think Sfardim do it, but we do it. Ashkenazim, we do it. We wear this white kittel. What do they wear? You wear a white suit. You wear a white suit. We wear a white kittel. Oh. And I wear it at the Seder. And you know why I wear it? It's brought down the Shulchan Aruch to get your children to ask you, why are you wearing such a funny robe? But there must be something different tonight. And then it says you're supposed to give nuts and candies to the children. Why? So they should ask you, what's going on tonight? It's different. You don't hand out candies every night. And then it says that you're supposed to ask 4 questions. What are those questions? We know the questions. Ma nishtana halayla ze mikol halelos. Now it's customary that the youngest child gets up and says it. Do you all do that in your homes? Yeah. The youngest child gets up and does that. I remember one time I did a Seder at a nursing home. I was the youngest one there. So I had to stand on the chair and do it. I was clearly the youngest one by about 50 years. But what's going on? Why do we have to ask these questions? Now, the halacha says that if 2 great Torah scholars are eating together, having a Seder together, one of the Torah scholars has to ask the other Torah scholar these questions. It says that if you're having a Seder with just you and your husband or you and your wife, one has to ask the other the questions. Oh, thank you very much. It says something else very interesting. If you're having a Seder by yourself, you have to ask yourself the questions. Because the reason is, the question is supposed to evoke in you, trigger in you, that you don't know. You're searching to find something new. That's what a question is. And if you think about it, even when you ask a question, how do you ask a question? Listen to my voice. Jacob, ask me a question.
What do you want me to ask?
Oh, everyone hear Jacob's voice? Say it again.
What do you want me to ask?
What do you want me to ask you? Tonally, what happens when you ask a question is your voice goes up. What do you want me to ask you? And it sort of sits there and hangs, and it needs to be resolved. It has to come down. I want you to ask me a question. My voice comes down. So speech pathologists will tell you, and audiologists will tell you, the reason is because a question is saying, it's like a musical note. It just hangs there till you bring it down. That's the idea of a question. A question means I'm incomplete until you answer me. And the Seder is looking for that completion. Now, I want to ask everybody a question. I want to ask you a question. We have 4 sons in the Haggadah. There are 4 types of children that we speak to when we tell the story of the going out of Egypt. Who are those 4 sons? The Chacham, the wise son, the Rasha, the evil son, the Tam, the simple son, and the She'enu Lishol, the son who doesn't know how to ask. 4 types of sons. Now, where do we get these 4 sons from? The Torah tells in 4 different places that you have to teach your children what happened to you when you were in Egypt. The Torah stresses it. Teach your children about all of the miracles of the going out of Egypt. Tell your children. Encourage them to ask and teach them. And our rabbis explained the reason it says it 4 times in 4 different places in the Torah is because there are 4 types of children. Now I want to play a game with you. I'm going to read to you the question of the wise son and the question of the son who is called the evil son. And I want you to tell me what the difference is between their question. Now, it's going to be a little bit challenging, as you will see. Here it goes. Everybody listen? Everybody ready? I'm going to say it in Hebrew. We're going to all say this at the Seder, so it's a good review. Here is the question of the Chacham, the wise son. You can find this in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 20. His question is as follows. It says, the Chacham says, let me make sure I got it right over here. Ki yish'alcha bincha macha lemor. When your child will ask you tomorrow, saying, Maha edus, what are these laws? Va'chuchim, these statutes. Va'mishpatim, these ordinances, other types of laws. Asher tziva Hashem Elokeinu eschem, which is Shem our God, commanded you. Listen carefully. Listen to his question. Ki yish'alcha bincha macha lemor. When your child will ask you tomorrow, what are these laws, statutes, and ordinances which Hashem, our God, commanded you? That's his question. Why is that the question of a wise son? Is there anything wise about that question? When your son will ask you tomorrow, what are these laws that Hashem, our God, commanded you? Do you hear any wisdom in that question?
He's not asking himself. He's basically referring to the younger child, saying that, well, if he asked, basically implying that he knows the answer himself. Right?
Or will you know the answer?
Well, let's hear. He's asking a question. He's saying, Ki sha'alcha bincha macha lemor. When your child will ask you, your son will ask you tomorrow, saying, what are these laws that Hashem, our God, commanded you? Well, listen to the evil son's question and tell me if you hear a difference. The evil son, or the son attributed, the question attributed to the evil son, found in Deuteronomy. Actually, that's chapter 6, verse 21. The other was in Exodus, verse 26. It says as follows. The question attributed to the evil son is, V'haya ki yomru aleichem b'neichem. When your children will say to you, Ma avoda zos lechem? What's all this service to you? That's the question of the evil son. What's the difference? Do you hear a difference? Listen carefully. I'll tell you in English. It says, the wise son says, what are all these laws that Hashem, our God, commanded you? Okay, that's the wise son's question. The evil son's question is, what is all this service? Ma avoda zos lechem? What is all this service to you? What's all this work that we're doing? All this service to you? Do you hear a difference in the questions?
Yeah, it's a bit quirk in the voice.
What's that?
A bit of a quirk in the voice.
In my voice?
In the voice of the...
What's the quirk in his voice?
Yeah, he's saying, why is this so weird? Why is it like this? You know, It's evil.
Okay, so some say that, Sean. You're right. Some say, Ma avoda zos lechem. What's this heavy work that you're doing? Avoda can mean in Hebrew heavy work. Avoda can also mean those service to God. Avoda is Hashem. So I'm going to tell you something, everybody. Listen carefully.
That mean for himself.
Oh, so some say that also. Excellent. That's what the Haggadah says. He says, Ma avoda zos lechem. What's it to you? And he's including himself from it. He doesn't say lanu us. He says to you, not me. So some say that.
So the Chacham is also saying that. What are you doing?
Very good. The Chacham says it also. He says, what are these laws? What are these laws to you? What are these laws of yours?
I think the difference, like what I hear, is that the Chacham includes Hashem, our God, and the Rasha doesn't.
True, that's true. The Chacham does say Hashem Elokeinu, but the Rasha's question isn't so far from it. He says, you know, what? He says, Ma avoda azos lechem. What's all this service to you? What's it all about? Like, I don't see why that's the question of an evil son. So let me suggest something to you. And this is what the Malbim, the 19th century rabbi, says. Listen carefully. The Malbim says, you know, the questions are almost identical. The difference is what's behind the question. Listen carefully to one word difference. The question of the wise son begins as follows. Ki ish'alcha bincha macha lemor. When your child will ask you tomorrow, saying, what are all these laws? The question of the evil son is, when your child will say to you, what's all this service to you? What's the difference between the wise son and the evil son? The wise son says, Ki yishalcha. He's asking a question. The evil son is making a statement. They're asking the same question. But one wants to know, the other one is just making a statement. You know, I could ask things in different ways. I could say like this. I could say, you know, why do you make a blessing on soda? So what do I mean by that? I could either mean, you know, teach me, like, why are you so specific? And why are we so specific? Everything has its own blessing. And you might answer me and say, you know, because the more specific we are, the more gratitude we have to God. Beautiful. But, you know, I could say those same words in a different way. I could say these words, why do you make a blessing on soda? What is my tone applying those words?
But you can't tell the tone.
It's like ridicule.
I'm really laughing at what do you need to make a blessing on soda? Why do you need to make a blessing on soda? Am I looking for an answer in that statement? Or am I attacking the idea that we have to make a blessing on soda? I think I'm attacking. Now, there are some people who are very smart. Some people say, why do you make a blessing on soda? But you know what? If you can read what's really behind them, They couldn't care less.
You mean that
They're-
they say it in like a sarcastic tone?
Well, they might say it even in a normal tone, but really they're not looking for an answer. They're looking just because they couldn't care less. They're looking to attack blessings. Yeah,
How do you know it's a question or statement if they're both receiving?
that's a good question. That's a good question. How do you know? Now, when I was with that lady in the hotel, I thought she was asking me questions. She was using a very nice language. She was talking in a way like, how do we know that God exists? But really what she was saying to me, if I could read, if I could have listened more carefully to what was behind her words, it would have sounded more like, Rabbi, prove to me God exists. Well, how do you know God exists? It's not, how do you know God exists? How do you know God exists? Do you hear the difference? You could say the same words, but what is behind your question is the difference between everything. What makes the evil son's question an evil question is he's not asking a question at all. He's making a statement. He's saying, I don't care about this. What's all this service to you? I couldn't care less. The wise son is saying, what's all this service to you? I really want to know. So I'll tell you, my friends, you know what you learn from this? No question is a bad question. Every question is a good question if it's really a question. But a question has to mean you really want to grow. You really want to grow. You really want to find an answer. You're really looking to enhance yourself as a Jew to make yourself a greater person. If your question is merely just an attack, if someone, and you might find this in life, people will ask you questions about things. And listen carefully, are they asking you questions or making statements? If they're making statements, don't bother answering them. You know what I should have done with this lady when she was asking me all those so-called questions? You know what I should have done? Guess what I should have done?
Not mind her.
You know what I should have done?
Not mind her. Don't say anything.
And what?
Don't say anything to her.
I should have said to her, oh, those are really, really great questions you're asking me. But we don't even know each other yet. We just met each other. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids. I should have talked to her half an hour about her children. Why? Because then she would have trusted me and maybe she would have shown up tomorrow. But all I did was answer what I thought were questions and I set her back. Because she wasn't looking to learn. She was looking just to attack. The evil son's question are statements of attack. I don't want to grow. I don't want to know. You can't prove anything to me. The wise son's question is the same question. But it's prefaced, it's preceded by the words when he'll ask you. He wants to know, he wants to grow. So the goal of the Seder is to be like the wise son. To look and to search and to find something new in the evening that you have never discovered before. Okay. Now what are we supposed to discover? Let's take a look for a moment. One of the first commandments that God gave us, who can tell me? What were the first 3 commandments that God gave us? The first 3 commandments He gave the Jewish nation. Well, that was much later. That was actually at Har Sinai, 40 days later. What were the commandments we received while we were still in Egypt? Before we left Egypt, we received 3 commandments. What were those 3 commandments? Rosh Chodesh, good. Change your calendar to go after the moon, good. Second commandment was the commandment to eat matzah. Third commandment was the commandment to take a lamb, tie it to your bedpost, take it outside, make a big fire, and roast it whole over a fire. It's called the Paschal sacrifice. 3 commandments. New moon, matzah, Paschal offering. Listen carefully. Why did God choose these 3 things as the first 3 things to tell the Jewish people? We're now a nation. We're in Egypt. We're ready to be liberated. God's ready to bring us out. He gives us 3 commandments. Change your calendar, eat matzah, and offer up a lamb as a sacrifice. What do these 3 things have to do with anything? So let me explain to you. In Egypt, the calendar always went after the sun. The Egyptians actually worshipped the sun as one of their gods, and all dates were determined in the Earth's relative relationship with the sun. Let me ask you a question. When you look at the sun every morning, does it rise? Every night, does it set? When you look at the moon, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there? What's the difference in the moon and the sun? The difference in the moon and the sun is something which happens over and over and over again. And it's interesting, religions that use the sun as their determinant of a calendar often believe in something called predetermination or predestination. Predestination means that you were born with something you can't change. Just like the sun can't change. It's always going to be there in the morning, it's going to set at night. It's constant. First thing God says to us is, change your calendar. Go after the moon. Why? Because the moon's changing. And you have to understand, if you're going to be a great human being, you have to appreciate that change is possible. Just like the moon, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not there. It's going to come back again. You have to understand, just like it changes, you can change. First thing you have to know, if you want to be a great human being, you have to appreciate the fact that you can change. That's commandment number 1. Commandment number 2 is, God says, eat matzah. You know, He gave us a commandment to eat matzah even before we left Egypt. Which is interesting. We forget that sometimes. One commandment of matzah is to remember how we went out of Egypt. But the first time the commandment was given was when we were still in Egypt, to eat matzah. So there's a spiritual aspect of matzah. What's the spiritual aspect? How do you make matzah? What's the recipe for matzah? Water and flour, one of the 5 grains. Wheat, spelt, oat, barley, or rye. What's the recipe for bread? Flour and one of the 5 grains. Right? Wheat, spelt, oats, barley, and rye. What's the difference between matzah and bread? It's the same recipe. What's the difference? The difference is that we know that when you combine water with any of these 5 grains, there's going to be a chemical reaction. That chemical reaction will produce a type of glucose. The byproduct of that chemical reaction will be carbon dioxide. That carbon dioxide will cause a rise, a leavening. We sometimes want to stimulate that leavening, enhance it, but we put some yeast in. We make some more bacteria to, really make the rise really big. What's matzah? Matzah is wheat and water, but what do? We stop the rise. We prevent it from growing. How do we do that? Well, I'll tell you. First, you have to take wheat, which was guarded, so no water should touch it. You have to take water that's guarded, that no wheat touched it. You have to add it together, and as soon as you add it together, a stopwatch goes off, and the race begins. You put the water into the wheat, you flatten it out, you smooth it out, you make it round, you make some holes in it, you get it into the oven, you bake it, you pull it out, all within an 18-minute period. If you can keep this matzah, this wheat and water moving, right, and not allow 18 minutes to go by where it was idle, you could stop the leavening process. You could stop the process. You could stop what's natural. You could rule over what's natural, so to speak. That's what matzah is. Now, why is this the second commandment that God gives us? Why does He give us a commandment of matzah? What's the idea? Why does He give this commandment? What's the deeper spiritual meaning? I think the deeper spiritual meaning is as follows. Number 1, if you look at bread, what actually gives bread that really fluffy appearance? What is it? You know what it is? It's air. It's air. Is there anything really there? It's really just an illusion. It's just wheat and water with a reaction that produced carbon dioxide and caused a rise, but that whole fluffy inside of it really doesn't exist. It's really an illusion. And our rabbis tell us spiritually, it represents the idea of arrogance. Of arrogance, meaning the idea that there's something more important about me than there should be. So bread is the idea of falseness. And spiritually, it's the idea of the falseness in ourself, which we call arrogance. Because what's arrogance? Arrogance means that I think there's something about me which deserves praise. And if I'm going to say there's something, if I'm going to look for something phony about myself that deserves praise, that's called arrogance. What's matzah? Matzah is a very honest food. It's the bread and the water, but there's no rise, there's no illusion, there's no lie, so to speak. All it is what it is. It's very truthful. There's nothing fake about it. And that's why matzah represents the idea of humility. Because what's humility? Humility is the idea that I know exactly who I am. I'm honest about myself. I'll tell you something, by the way. Humility does not mean that I think that I'm a shmata. A shmata is like a dust rag. Yiddish. You don't know the word shmata? Where'd you grow up? You don't grow up in New York? Shmarkan, you know shmata? Actually, shmartut is a word in the Gemara. Shmartut means a rag. But it doesn't mean that I'm a doormat. It doesn't mean that I'm a dust rag. What humility means is that I know exactly who I am. I'm very honest about myself. That means if I'm Michael Jordan, I'm supposed to say that I'm the greatest basketball player that ever lived. If you ask Michael Jordan, he should honestly say that he is the best basketball player who ever lived in the last 20, 30 years. Is that arrogance? No. It's the truth. What makes it humility? But who gave me that ability? God. And if God had given you the ability that I had, you should be greater. Yes, I have talents. I know I have talents. But it's all from God. And if I achieved anything, it's so small. God gave me the brain. God gave me the body. God gave me the hands. God gave me the circumstances. God gave me the parents. God gave me the ability. So if I achieve something, like, where's there room for a false sense that I achieved it? That's arrogance. Humility means that I'm going to be honest. I know who I am, but it's from God. Matzah represents the idea of complete humility because it's honest. It says what it is. I'm water and I'm flour. That's all. Nothing phony, nothing fake. Now it's interesting. One reason this is the second commandment that we receive while we're in Egypt, because God's teaching us an important lesson about having a relationship with Him. If you want to have a relationship with God, you got to be honest with yourself. You got to realize you have great talents, but you have to appreciate who gave it to you. Don't think that what you have is something that you brought into yourself. Don't think that you're more than you are. Recognize exactly who you are, but your talents are straight from God. If you want to have a relationship with God, you need to have that honesty. And God is saying to you now, Jews, I want to make you a holy nation, but you got to work on this trait of humility. That's interesting, by the way. For 7 days, God says only eat matzah, right? It must mean that for 7 days, He wants us to work on this trait. Someone asked me a question, but Rabbi, maybe we should eat matzah the whole year, you know? It wouldn't be a bad idea, right? Maybe we should eat matzah the whole year, you know, work on this trait of honesty and humility. The answer is, 7 days is like a 7-day injection of penicillin. Sometimes you could have an infection, but you give enough penicillin that you locate the infection, you could cure it. Penicillin or matzah? The idea is that for 7 days we can work on arrogance and develop this honest sense of our talents, but the appreciation that's all from God. If you can do that, you can have a relationship with God. You know, like, you see, Torah has one of these videos that it shows this guy, he's having a date with this girl. You know, well, now you listen. Now Jacob listens, because now I start talking about relations, right? You know, so I'm the philosophical stuff over here. Now I talk about girls. He's right with me. Excuse me, I'm just kidding. But he says like this: that this guy's on a date with a girl, and it's a funny video. And he sits down at the table with her, and he starts saying, you know, oh, when I'm going to produce my new movie, you know, I spoke to Steve Spielberg, and he wants to buy the rights, and you know, she's looking at him, and he's like, well, actually, I didn't produce it. You know, he said, you know, but, you know, when I'm going to direct the movie, you know, she looks at him, and he's like, well, actually, I'm not going to direct it. And he's like, you know, but, you know, when I'm going to act in a film that Steven Spielberg is directing, and she's looking at him, and he's like, and the waiter's listening to this, and he goes, so he goes to the kitchen, he brings out a dish covered, you know, in a silver thing. He puts it down before him. He lifts it up. There's a big matzah. You know, he looks at the matzah, and he looks at her, and he says, well, actually, I'm the guy who fetches the sandwiches from the store. You know? Matzah teaches us honesty. Teaches us not to be false. So, first thing God is teaching us, if you want to be a holy nation, you got to know that you have talents, but be honest. Where did it come from? Second thing I think is so interesting. You know, let me ask you a question. What's natural? Is it natural for bread to rise? When you add water to wheat, is it natural that the chemical reaction will take place and CO2 will result? There will be a gas and the water will rise, and that will cause a leavening in the bread? Is that natural?
Yes.
Absolutely. Is it unnatural to try to stop it? Absolutely. It's extremely unnatural. Because to stop it, you have to expend a lot of energy. You know, as soon as you touch that flour to the water, you have to start kneading and pushing and, you know, and prevent something that naturally wants to take effect. So you know what the second lesson God is trying to teach us about matzah? God is saying to us that if you want to have a relationship with God, you want to be holy, you have to understand that the tests of life are to fight over nature, to fight your nature. You know, we have natures, Yuri, that we want to be like animals. You know, what does an animal want to do? An animal wants to be at rest. It wants to sleep. It wants to lie in the sun and eat, you know, gush gadi. Of course. Smart animals do. You know? That's what an animal wants to do. It wants to lie in the sun. It wants to rest. It doesn't want to work. And just wants to feed its body. We have an animal side to who we are. We do. And if you look at the genetics, DNA, you know, we resemble the monkey. No question. There is an animal in us. But if you want to be great, if you want to develop something great about yourself, you know what you have to do? You have to rule over your animal. You have to rule over what's natural about you. You have to rule over nature. God says for 7 days, I want to teach you to rule over nature. Make matzah. Don't let the leavening, which is natural, take place. Rule over it. You know? It's natural, right? It's natural to be afraid. It's natural to say, you know, when your boss tells you, look, if you don't come to work on Saturday, I'm going to fire you. It's natural to be afraid. It's unnatural to say, well, wait a minute, I know there's a creator of this universe who's going to take care of me. You know, it's natural when you walk by a pizza store and you smell pizza with pepperoni that you have a strong desire for it and you want to buy it. It's unnatural to say, wait a minute, but God has said this is cruel to mix milk and meat, I'm not going to do it. Right? It's natural to say that, you know, when you see her and she sees him, you know, it's unnatural to say, no, we're going to sanctify this through marriage. You know? It's unnatural. Do you understand how it works? Greatness in life means we have to fight over nature. We have to fight over who we are. That's what makes a great human being. And that's what matzah teaches us. Stop the natural. Stop it from taking effect. Rule over it, so to speak. And that's what I told you, I think, once in the lecture I did on the letters. What's the word for a righteous person in Hebrew? A tzaddik. A tzaddik. It's a very interesting word, tzaddik. Because the letter kuf at the end of the word means monkey. A monkey is an animal. We look like monkeys. You go to the zoo, we all look very much like monkeys. And that's why that was so much fun to watch. Because they look so human-like. Right? But you know what tzaddik is? The 2 letters at the beginning of that word spelled tzad. You know what tzad means? Latzud in Hebrew means to trap, to hunt, to control. You know what tzaddik is? Someone who traps, who controls the monkey in him. He's not ruled by the animal, he rules over the animal. Yeah, we have an animal inside of us, we know that. But we're not supposed to follow it, we're supposed to rule and control it. That's what matzah teaches us. Rule over the natural. It's easy to be a monkey. You know, it sees a banana and eats it. It's difficult to be a Jew. You see that banana, make sure you make a blessing first. You know? That's greatness. Greatness is when you rule over yourself. You're not ruled by yourself. That's what matzah teaches us. How about the Paschal offering? Third thing we got, God said, take the lamb and put it on a spit, roast it on a fire, do not boil it. And that do not boil it, do not break the bones. You know, by the way, that's one of the reasons you probably do have this custom. On the Seder night, we don't have roasted foods. You don't have a roasted chicken, we don't have a roasted lamb. You know why? Because people shouldn't think we're doing the Paschal offering. Because you can't have the Paschal offering today without the Beit HaMikdash. So people shouldn't be confused. That's why the custom on Passover is to eat foods that are boiled. Like I know my mother always made brisket. It's like it's like you boil the meat in water. Is that what you have? Does everybody have that? Yeah? Jachnit. Oh. I'm really, everyone knows this, that in my previous incarnation, I was originally from Samarkand. I'm pretty confident that I am originally from Samarkand. And that explains my love for Samarkand, the food. But we don't eat anything which is roasted because people shouldn't think that we're eating the Paschal offering. Now, what was this mitzvah that God gave us? Why did God give us a mitzvah to take the Paschal lamb, take a lamb, put it on a spit, bring it over a fire, and roast it whole? Can't break it. Can't boil it. Very interesting reason. The god in Egypt was the lamb. In addition to the sun, it was the lamb. One of their gods was like a ram, like a sheep. That was one of their gods. It's hard to understand why, but that was one of their gods. So it's interesting. One of the first things that God commands us to do before you leave Egypt, Jews, you've been here for 210 years. First 100 years were pretty good. The last 90 years or so were slavery. They got more intense as the years went on. But Jews, you're slaves to these masters. I want you to take the God of your masters and I want you to roast it over a fire. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that takes courage? It takes a lot of courage to do. To take the lamb of the people who've been enslaving you for the last 100 years and roast it whole over the fire. That's a tremendously brave act. And in fact, not only that, they were supposed to tie the lamb up. That's this Shabbat HaGadol, is when they actually, 3 days they prepared it. They tied the lamb up to their houses. So the Egyptians could watch it and say, what are you doing with this lamb? And you're supposed to say to them, wait, we're going to sacrifice it. We're going to kill it. You know, you're going to kill my God? Yes. Then they had to roast it on a barbecue spit. You know, whenever you smell roasted lamb, it smells great, doesn't it? The Egyptians are supposed to look over into the backyard of the Jews. And, you know, they look over at the Babakanos over there in the backyard, and they say to them, oh my God! They're supposed to say, yeah, that's your God, right over there. It's roasting on the spit, you know? But that's exactly what God wants them to do.
After the 10 plagues, this
was preceding the last plague. Preceding the Malchut Bechorot. We haven't yet hit Malchut Bechorot yet, death of the firstborn. After the 9th plague. Now what's the idea? Because God teaches us a very important lesson in growth. That, number one, you want to be great. You want to be a holy people. You have to realize change is possible. Go by the moon, because the moon changes. I want you to eat matzah. You have to rule over nature, to rule over yourself. But number three is very important, it's very interesting. That in life, if you're going to be somebody different, somebody greater than you are, and I'll tell you something, we all want to be somebody greater than we are. I think none of us want to be the person we are right now. I think we should be happy with who we are, and be confident in who we are, and have positive self-esteem, 100%. But I feel in my own self, that I want to be greater. I want to strive to be as big a person as I can be, as great a holy person as I can be. We all want that. God is teaching us something very interesting. When you begin the process of growth, you're always going to have something that you have to do in which you break with your past. You've been enslaved for 210 years in Egypt. You've been subject to a people who worship this lamb as a god. First thing you have to do, Jews, is show these people that this is a joke. Show them that you laugh at it. You're willing to put it on a barbecue spit and roast it whole in front of them. God says to us, you know, in life, sometimes before you begin, you got to take one very big step. And once you take that very big step, God will help you climb the ladder and go up and up and up and up and up. But sometimes the big step has to be to show God that you're committed. And that's what the Jewish people have to do. They have to show God, we are committed. We're willing to take the God of Egypt and roast it.